Hey everyone, it's Christopher, Mono County Library Director and co-host of the Oxygen Starved podcast, and I'm here in our Lee Vining Library for Book Talk Friday, meaning I've got two great reads you can check out from the library, one old and one new, and we're going to start with the new. The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins, her first adult novel after a string of successful young adult books. And this became an instant bestseller, getting great reviews when it came out in January. Now, the story is about a young woman named Jane, or so she calls herself, getting a somewhat demeaning job as a dog walker in a gated community of McMansions called Thornfield Estates in a suburb of Birmingham, Alabama. Jane is, as one reviewer describes her, a little bit immoral, sometimes pilfering small objects from the houses she visits, figuring the rich owners will never miss them. She meets a handsome, brooding widower named Eddie Rochester, who she sees as a potential meal ticket to a solid relationship and prosperity for herself. But Eddie is still getting over the recent death at sea of his wildly successful lifestyle guru wife, and Jane has an uphill battle to win his heart. And that uphill battle is going to get even steeper as the story progresses. Now, this is not a straightforward romance. It's a thriller, and many reviewers describe it as a compulsive page-turner, a book that makes you late for other things because you cannot put it down. And if the title and the character names remind you of a certain classic novel, well, that's intentional. The publisher sums it up saying, with delicious suspense, incisive wit, and a fresh feminist sensibility, The Wife Upstairs flips the script on Jane Eyre in a timeless tale of forbidden romance, ill-advised attraction, and a wife who just won't stay buried. So you might guess what I've chosen for the old book this week, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and indeed it's a great book, but I'm throwing in my own plot twist. Jane Eyre inspired a number of other novels, and one with obvious parallels that I'm going to highlight instead is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This first came out in 1938 and has been available ever since, helped in no small part by the film and stage adaptations over the decades, including the most famous by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, despite obvious comparisons from the day it was published, du Maurier didn't attribute Rebecca to Jane Eyre, but the plot lines and settings are eerily similar, with a darkly brooding, handsome Maxim de Winter whose first wife disappears at sea under mysterious circumstances, a young, beautiful second wife who finds herself haunted by the ghost of the first, and of course the setting of a remote country house adding up to a truly gothic thriller. Du Maurier herself said later in her life she was inspired to write this book from her own marriage as a young wife whose husband was still in love with his previous fiancée and continued to be unfaithful to her while they were married, spawning pangs of jealousy and distrust and sowing the seeds for this book. These ingredients and her writing style have kept Rebecca on the bookshelves for over 80 years. In fact, many people who've never even read the book recognize the first line of it. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. So the second Mrs. Maxim de Winter remembered the chilling events that led her down the turning drive to the isolated Greystone manse on the windswept Cornish coast. With a husband she barely knew, the young bride arrived at this immense estate only to be inexorably drawn into the life of the first Mrs. de Winter, the beautiful Rebecca, dead but never forgotten. Her suite of rooms never touched, her clothes ready to be worn, her servant, the sinister Mrs. Danvers, still loyal. And as an eerie presentiment of evil tightened around her heart, the second Mrs. de Winter began her search for the real fate of Rebecca. It's a ripping good yarn. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Another ripping good yarn, The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. And of course, the great novel that inspired them, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. All three of these books are available in Mono County libraries. Come in, find them, or find your own great ripping good yarn to read. In the meantime, stay safe and happy reading.